It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, the kind where I'd sit on my porch, sip a cold drink, and listen to the wind rustling through the trees. But no. The universe had other plans, specifically in the form of Karen, my neighbor and serial property invader. There it was, her oversized white SUV, parked smack in the middle of my farmhouse driveway. Again. It was like a monument to her audacity, gleaming under the sun as if mocking me. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. This had to be some kind of joke. I took a deep breath, counted to 5, then 10, then 20. Maybe this time there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she had some emergency. Though, knowing Karen, her definition of an emergency ranged from running out of oat milk to needing a quick Instagram photo in front of my barn. But still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. Of course. I stepped out of my truck, boots crunching against the gravel. The frustration bubbling inside me reached dangerous levels. This wasn't the first time Karen had treated my property like her personal parking lot. No, this was the 8th time. The first couple of times, I let it slide. The 3rd time, I knocked on her door and politely asked her not to do it again. The 4th time, I left a note. The 5th, I called her. The 6th, I knocked a little harder. The 7th? Let's just say voices were raised, and she responded with a dramatic gasp and a, "Wow, you're really being aggressive right now." And now, here we were again, on round 8 of this ridiculous battle. I walked up to her SUV, half expecting to find a note or a reason for her intrusion. Nothing. Just an empty car, locked, sitting there like it belonged. I stared at it, hands on my hips, running through my limited options. I could leave another note. I could knock on her door. Or, I could handle this like the mature, responsible adult I was supposed to be. So, I turned on my heel, marched straight up to Karen's house, and knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. "Karen!" I called, my patience hanging by a thread. "I know you're in there." I wasn't sure if I expected her to pop out of a bush or slide out of a window, but after a few seconds the door swung open. And there she was, in all her entitled glory, wrapped in a silk robe with an iced coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She blinked at me, feigning innocence. "Oh hey, what's up?" I gestured toward the driveway. "You parked in front of my farmhouse again." She tilted her head, like I had just spoken in an alien language. "Oh right. Yeah, I was just running a quick errand and, your driveway is just so convenient." "Karen," I said, forcing a calm I absolutely did not feel, "you've been parked there for at least 3 hours." She sipped her coffee leisurely, as if this conversation wasn't happening. Yeah. Time got away from me. I stared at her, waiting for her to show even the slightest hint of remorse. Nothing. Just that same blank, oblivious expression. "Could you move it?" I asked, voice tight. She sighed dramatically, like I had just asked her to carry a mountain on her back. "Ugh, I literally just sat down." I stared at her, waiting. She stared back, like she was expecting me to magically disappear from her doorstep. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the urge to launch into a full-blown speech about boundaries, respect, and how I wasn't her personal valet service. "Well," I prompted. She sighed again, long and drawn out, before muttering, "Fine. Give me, 5 minutes." I knew better than to trust her version of 5 minutes. It would be 20. Maybe an hour. Maybe never, if I didn't stand there like an idiot waiting for her. And that's when it hit me. The idea. The plan. The perfect, glorious, petty payback. I didn't say another word. Just turned on my heel and walked back to my truck. But instead of waiting, I hopped in, backed up, and positioned my truck directly behind her SUV, blocking her in completely. Then, just to add the cherry on top, I locked up the farmhouse, grabbed my bags, and got in my other car. The one parked outside the gate. As I drove away, I snapped a picture of her car, trapped with no way out, and sent it to her with a simple message. "Enjoy your stay. I'll be back Monday." I barely made it a mile down the road before my phone started vibrating violently. Call after call. Karen, realizing her mistake a little too late. I didn't answer. I just smiled, turned up the music, and drove off into my perfectly peaceful weekend. Karen woke up feeling good about her morning. She stretched, grabbed her phone, and strolled over to the kitchen, humming to herself. But the moment she glanced out her window, her mood soured instantly. Her SUV was still there, sitting in the exact same spot she had left it. But now, something was wrong. There was a massive, rust-covered farm truck parked directly behind it, blocking her in completely. Her mouth fell open. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and looked again, as if somehow, the situation would magically fix itself. It didn't. It was real. It was happening. She grabbed her phone and opened her messages, scrolling until she found the last text she had ignored the night before. A picture of her trapped car and a short, smug message. "Enjoy your stay. I'll be back Monday." Her jaw clenched. Her nails dug into the sides of her phone. He did not. She immediately hit call, pressing the phone to her ear, waiting for Jake to pick up. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Same thing. Her frustration grew by the second. Her iced coffee sat abandoned on the counter, condensation pooling beneath it as she paced her kitchen in furious circles. This was ridiculous, childish, unacceptable. She had places to be, things to do. He had no right to block her in like this. Didn't he understand how inconvenient this was for her? She took a deep breath and tried to think. There had to be a way out of this. Maybe she could get the truck towed. Yes, that was it. She would call a tow truck, have them move the thing, and be on her way before lunchtime. 10 minutes later, after a frustrating conversation with the local towing company, Karen's face burned with disbelief. They refused to tow the truck. Something about private property laws, liability, and how they weren't getting involved in some neighbor dispute. She had practically begged them, even offered extra money, but they weren't budging. Her fingers hovered over her phone's screen again. The next logical step? The police. Surely they would handle this. The sheriff arrived an hour later, a middle-aged man with a slow stride and the kind of face that had seen too much nonsense to be impressed by anything anymore. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently as he approached. "Morning, ma'am," the sheriff greeted. "What seems to be the problem?" Karen wasted no time launching into an exaggerated version of the story. She painted herself as the innocent victim, trapped against her will by a vengeful, unreasonable neighbor. The sheriff listened, nodding at all the right moments, but when she finally stopped talking, he just sighed, adjusting his belt. "Ma'am," he said, glancing at the block driveway, "this is private property. Ain't much I can do." Karen gawked at him. "What do you mean, there's nothing you can do? My car is stuck. He's holding me hostage." The sheriff scratched his chin, unconcerned. "Far as I can tell, he just parked his own truck on his own land. You parked on his first. Technically, you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Her voice rose. "I wasn't trespassing. I was just parked on someone else's property without permission," the sheriff finished for her, looking bored. "That's what trespassing is." Karen felt her face heat up with rage and embarrassment. This was not how this was supposed to go. She had expected the sheriff to force Jake to move his truck, to get her out of this mess. Instead, he was standing there like it was all just one big joke. "So, what? I'm just supposed to sit here until Monday?" The sheriff shrugged. "Looks like it." And just like that, he turned, tipped his hat, and walked away, leaving Karen standing there in stunned silence. Her frustration boiled over the moment his cruiser disappeared down the road. She stomped back inside, grabbed her phone, and scrolled through her contacts, searching for someone, anyone, who could come help her. First, she called her friend Gina, but Gina just laughed and said, "Wait, you're telling me you got yourself locked in someone else's driveway? That's hilarious." That call ended quickly. Then, she tried bribing the local teenagers down the street, to come help push the truck. They came, looked at the size of the vehicle, and walked away, shaking their heads, laughing amongst themselves. Desperation creeping in, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. If no one was going to help her, she'd figure out a way to get out of here herself. She stormed outside, determined to find some sort of solution. That's when she noticed something strange. A small, locked storage barn near the back of Jake's property. She had never paid much attention to it before, but now, standing there with nothing else to do, she noticed something off. There was movement. A rustling noise. Something was inside. Her curiosity took over. If Jake had left for the weekend, what was making that sound? She approached cautiously, looking around to make sure no one was watching. She pressed her ear against the old wooden door, listening carefully. The sound came again. A low, muffled whimper. Her breath caught. That wasn't just any sound. That was a sound of something or someone inside. Her mind raced through possibilities. What if Jake was hiding something? Something illegal? What if she had just stumbled onto some kind of secret? She peered through a crack in the wooden planks, heart pounding. For a moment she couldn't see much, just shadows shifting inside. Then, suddenly, two small eyes stared back at her. Karen jumped back, a gasp escaping her lip. Something was in there. And now, she had to know what. Karen's heart pounded as she stumbled back from the barn, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. There was no denying what she had seen. Something was in there, and it had eyes. She tried to convince herself it was just an animal, maybe a stray that had wandered in, but her gut told her otherwise. The way the shadows had moved, the way the eyes had locked onto hers, it wasn't random. It was intentional. It was as if whatever was inside knew she was there, watching. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more ridiculous and dramatic than the last. What if Jake was hiding something illegal? What if it was a secret operation? A smuggling ring? What if she had just uncovered something massive? She pressed her phone against the crack, hoping to snap a picture, but all she got was a blurry mess of wood and darkness. That wasn't going to cut it. She needed proof. Her fingers trembled as she pulled up her phone's keypad and dialed 911. The moment the dispatcher answered, she jumped straight into her breathless report. She told them she had been locked on private property, that she had stumbled upon something suspicious, that she was scared for her life. The words tumbled out in frantic desperation, but as she spoke, she realized how absurd it all sounded. She didn't have any real proof. No pictures, no sounds recorded, nothing but her own paranoia. Still, the dispatcher assured her that they would send someone to check it out. Karen hung up, hugging her arms around herself as she glanced nervously at the barn. Whatever was in there wasn't going anywhere, but she suddenly felt like she had made a mistake. Maybe she should have waited. Maybe she should have at least tried to peek inside first before calling the police. But it was too late now. She paced back and forth in Jake's driveway, eyes darting toward the road every few seconds. Then, finally, the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car appeared in the distance, kicking up dust as it sped toward her. Relief washed over her. The car rolled to a stop, and two officers stepped out, one of them being the same sheriff who had dismissed her earlier. He took one look at her and sighed like he already regretted coming back. "Ma'am, you again?" Karen crossed her arms, ignoring the way her face burned with a mix of embarrassment and stubbornness. "Yes, me again. And this time, I have a real emergency." The sheriff exchanged a glance with his partner, who looked equally unimpressed. "What's going on now?" Karen pointed toward the barn. "There's something in there. Something alive. I saw eyes." The officers looked at the barn, then back at her. Neither of them looked particularly alarmed. The sheriff adjusted his belt and walked toward the structure with the kind of slow, deliberate movement that suggested he wasn't expecting to find anything worth his time. His partner followed, hand resting lazily on his belt. Karen stood a few feet back, holding her breath as they reached the door. The sheriff knocked once, then twice before calling out, "Anyone in there?" Silence. Karen shifted anxiously on her feet. I swear, I saw something. The sheriff gave her a look but reached for the latch anyway. He tugged, found it locked, and muttered something under his breath before pulling out a keyring. Karen's stomach twisted. Why did he have keys to Jake's barn? Had he known all along? Was this part of something bigger? The lock clicked, the door creaked, and then, chaos. A blur of fur burst out from the darkness, small bodies tumbling over each other as they scrambled into the sunlight. Karen shrieked, stumbling backward as a pack of puppies, tiny, yipping, tail-wagging puppies, poured out of the barn like an avalanche of fluff. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the sheriff let out a long, deep sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. His partner coughed to hide a chuckle. Karen stared, mouth opening and closing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had expected something sinister, something terrifying. Not puppies. The sheriff turned to her with the expression of a man who had just hit his limit. "Ma'am," he said, slow and deliberate, "you called 911 over puppies?" Karen's face burned with humiliation, but she refused to back down. "They were locked up in there. How was I supposed to know?" The sheriff sighed again, looking like he aged 10 years in real time. "Those are rescue puppies, ma'am. Jake takes in strays from the area and fosters them until they find homes. That's what's in the barn. Not a crime scene. Not a smuggling ring. Just puppies." Karen wanted to disappear into the ground. She glanced around, hoping for an escape, but there was none. The officers were already talking amongst themselves, shaking their heads. The realization hit her like a brick. She had not only embarrassed herself, but she had also wasted police resources over nothing. Worse, she had made herself look like a fool in front of the entire town. Then, as if on cue, Jake's truck rolled up the driveway. Karen's stomach dropped. He stepped out, looking way too amused for someone who had just returned to find cops at his property. He took in the scene. His barn door wide open, puppies running around like they had just been freed from prison, Karen standing there looking like she was about to self-destruct. "Well," he said, leaning against his truck with a smirk. "Looks like someone had an eventful weekend." Karen clenched her jaw. "You trapped me here." Jake shrugged. "You parked in my driveway." Before she could fire back, the sheriff turned to Jake, looking tired. "She called 911 thinking you were running an illegal operation. Turns out it was just your puppies." Jake's smirk grew. "Puppies? That's what this was about." Karen glared at him, her face burning. "It looks suspicious, okay?" Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." The sheriff muttered something about paperwork before waving Jake off. "Next time, keep your neighbor in check, will ya?" Jake shot Karen a look that practically screamed, "That's your problem, not mine." Then, just to add insult to injury, he bent down, scooped up one of the puppies, and held it out toward her. "Want to adopt one? Maybe it'll teach you some patience." Karen made a noise somewhere between a groan and a strangled scream before stomping past him toward her car. To her horror, her SUV sputtered when she turned the key. Jake leaned against the driver's side window, arms crossed, grinning. "Looks like karma's still working." Karen refused to look at him. She refused to acknowledge any of it. She simply yanked out her phone, called a tow truck, and pretended this weekend had never happened. As she sat there, waiting for rescue, she heard Jake's parting words, the final nail in the coffin. "See you next weekend?" Karen swore she would never park in his driveway again.